A single saffron pound takes about 75,000 flowers because each crocus gives you only 3 red stigmas, and almost everything gets picked by hand. Iran still produces around 85 to 90% of the world's supply, and the plant prefers full sun and dry, well-drained ground because too much moisture can rot the corms. So, how did a hot climate flower turn into red gold locked behind glass? In this video, we break down the harvest math that makes saffron cost more than gold, why it thrives in dry regions with water scarcity, what creates that sweet, earthy taste, and the quick label checks you can use today to spot fake threads, weak quality, and what you are really paying for, fast. The spice that used to beat gold. People call saffron red gold, and that nickname has receipts. Encyclopedia Britannica straight up says, during various periods, saffron has been worth much more than its weight in gold. So here is the weird part. That line sounds like hype, until you remember how it was traded. In old markets, saffron was considered a portable luxury, and easy to carry, easy to hide, easy to tax, and easy to fake. If you lived in a time where dyes, perfumes, and medicine all overlapped, saffron became a status shortcut. Who else could afford to turn rice golden on purpose? And today, the trick still works because saffron is usually sold in tiny grams, like it wants you to compare it to jewelry. A 1-gram vial feels harmless, until you do the math and realize that small packaging hides a premium per gram game. Have you ever bought saffron and felt your brain say, "This better be amazing"? That reaction is the product. Britannica also calls it still the most expensive spice in the world. And notice what that sentence does. It pulls saffron out of the food category and shoves it into the luxury category. Surprising detail before we move on. Saffron was once sprinkled in public spaces like a flex. Rome literally perfumed itself with it in celebration. Stay with me, because the flower has a built-in limit. 3 threads, 1 flower, 0 shortcuts. Inside a saffron crocus, the valuable part is basically a tiny red fork. An EU product specification describes the anatomy like this. The style divides into 3 red fibers or stigmas. That is your entire harvest per flower. 3 stigmas. No more hidden inside, no bonus round. Now, the next twist. Crocus sativus has a biology problem that becomes a business problem. Researchers describe it as triploid and sterile, meaning it cannot reliably make seeds, so growers multiply it through corms, daughter bulbs. A PubMed paper puts it cleanly. Due to its triploid nature, it is sterile and is not able to set seeds, so it is propagated only by corms. That changes everything. If you ever see saffron seeds online, your scam radar should light up because the real crop spreads through bulbs, not seeds. And if the plant cannot be bred easily, you lose a huge lever that modern agriculture loves: rapid genetic improvement. So ask yourself, when the plant refuses the usual shortcuts, no seed pipeline, no easy breeding, who pays the bill? Growers do, with time. You do, at checkout. Surprising detail. TU Dresden notes saffron has been cultivated for more than 3,500 years, yet the crop still traces back through bulb clones across regions. Now let's talk about where it survives, because climate decides everything. Why it loves heat and hates wet feet. Saffron's sweet spot looks a lot like a tough Mediterranean setup. Strong sun, dry air, and soil that drains like a sieve. University guidance keeps repeating the same warning because growers keep learning it the hard way. The University of Vermont says, standing water or excessive moisture can rot the corms. Nebraska Extension says the same idea, even sharper. Saffron crocus needs very well-drained soil because wet soil causes bulb rot. So that hot, dry reputation is not a vibe, it is survival logic. In places with heavy rain and sticky clay, the crop can look fine, until rot wipes it out underground. And that is the cruel part. You often discover failure late. Now zoom out to real saffron landscapes, not backyard beds. The FAU describes saffron farming systems in arid regions facing severe water shortages, and adds the key advantage: here is the question people skip. If saffron likes dry summers, how do farmers handle timing? They aim at irrigation and field work around the plant's cycle. Growth in cooler seasons, dormancy in summer, so water gets used when it actually matters. Surprising detail. In Iran's Gonabad region, FAO says saffron can support livelihoods at scale. About 400,000 people tied to the crop in that region's system. And then the harvest hits. And the math turns brutal. The 75,000 flower reality check. Here is a number that changes how you see the spice. A pound, 0.45 kilograms of saffron represents 75,000 blossoms, according to Britannica. So if someone offers you cheap saffron, the first question becomes simple. Cheap compared to what exactly? Now picture harvest week. Saffron flowers open and fade fast, so timing becomes everything. Workers pick flowers, then separate the stigmas by hand. Britannica describes the method bluntly. The 3 stigmas are handpicked from each flower, then dried for use. Why handwork? Because the valuable part is delicate and tiny. Machines can shred, contaminate, or mix in yellow-style material that lowers grade. And once the threads are damaged, nobody pays premium prices. So the real product is not a spice. The product is precision labor, packed into dry red threads. That is why saffron behaves like a luxury item, even though it grows in a field. Ask yourself this, if one person rushes the separation step, what happens? You get more plant material, weaker aroma, and lower standards. Yet it still looks red enough to fool buyers. That is the start of the fraud problem we will hit soon. Surprising detail, saffron processing historically used charcoal drying, and that old technique still shapes flavor decisions today in some regions. Now for the part your tongue notices, why does it taste earthy sweet? The sweet earthy chemistry that hijacks your brain. People describe saffron as sweet earthy, sometimes floral, sometimes metallic. That layered feeling has a chemical backbone. A major scientific review states the bitter taste and an iodoform or hay-like fragrance are caused by chemicals picrocrosin and safranal. So when you taste saffron and think warm, dusty, sweet, you are tasting picrocrosin, taste, and smelling safranal, aroma. And the colour that stains rice gold comes largely from crocin, a pigment famous for being strong and water-soluble. Britannica notes crocin as the colouring matter. Here is the part most people miss. Saffron works at tiny doses because your senses amplify it. Aroma compounds lift fast, colour compounds bloom in liquid, and your brain connects the smell with luxury because you usually encounter it in special dishes. Paella, bouillabaisse, celebratory rice. Britannica even lists bouillabaisse as a classic pairing. So what happens when saffron gets cooked wrong? Heat can evaporate aroma before it ever reaches your nose. That is how people spend money and still taste almost nothing. Have you ever had saffron rice that looked yellow but smelled like nothing? That is usually extraction failure. Surprising detail, saffron contains 150 plus aroma-yielding compounds, meaning 2 batches can smell wildly different even when both look red. Which brings us to history, because people chased this scent for millennia. How saffron travelled from tombs to crusades, the timeline gets wild fast. Bronze Age art from Akrotiri on Santorini shows saffron harvest scenes dated to the 17th century BCE, often called the saffron gatherer's fresco. That is thousands of years before food trends, yet people already treated the plant as worthy of walls and ritual spaces. Then Rome turns saffron into a social flex. Britannica records a vivid line. The streets of Rome were sprinkled with saffron when Nero entered the city. Imagine that smell, an entire city scented like expensive spice, just to broadcast power. Fast forward again, saffron becomes tied to medicine texts and trade routes. Britannica notes it was cultivated by the Arabs in Spain about 961, and later may have been reintroduced into Western Europe by the Crusaders. That is a direct line from conquest and travel to what ends up in your pantry. And saffron even shows up in Chinese medical literature. Britannica points to the Bencao Gangmu, 1552 to 78, mentioning it. That means saffron's reputation travelled across empires, languages, and medical systems, because the colour, scent, and symbolism were portable. Surprising detail, after the Buddha's death, saffron dye became linked to robes, showing how a spice turned into a religious colour code in parts of Asia. Now here's the dark flip. When something stays valuable, people fake it. The fake saffron problem and the ISO rulebook. A 2025 scientific paper states safflower is frequently used as an adulterant in place of saffron due to visual similarity. So how do serious buyers protect themselves? Standards. ISO literally built a rulebook for saffron quality. The ISO abstract says ISO 3632-1:2011 establishes specifications for dried saffron obtained from the pistils of Crocus sativus L flowers. It even covers both threads and powder, which matters because powder is where fraud becomes easy. And there is a newer twist. ISO's site shows a new version available, ISO 3632-1:2025. That tells you the industry updates its definitions as testing improves and fraud evolves. Regional protection exists too. The EU publishes strict product specifications for protected saffron names like Azafrán de la Mancha, down to anatomical details and labeling rules. So when a label screams premium, your real question becomes what standard backs that claim? ISO testing, PDO certification, batch traceability, or just pretty packaging? Surprising detail, even real saffron can be cut with extra plant parts like yellow style, which can slide quality down while keeping the thread look. Now let's flip it. How do you make saffron actually taste premium? How to make saffron taste expensive at home? Saffron's power lives in extraction. If you toss dry threads straight into a hot pot, aroma can vanish before it hits your nose and color can spread unevenly. A cooking expert quote in Vogue nails the science in plain words. The colorants in saffron are water-soluble and the aromas evaporate very quickly. So the move is simple. Crush the threads lightly, then bloom them in lukewarm water or warm milk for a few minutes. You get a saffron concentrate, color and aroma already pulled out. Then add that liquid near the end of cooking so the smell survives. Now the buying side. Threads beat powder for trust because powder hides fraud. If you buy threads, look for deep red with minimal yellow style. If the jar smells like nothing, that is a red flag. If the price feels impossible, it usually is. Storage matters too. Light and air slowly flatten the aroma. Keep saffron sealed, dark and dry. And here is a pro trick. Saffron often performs better after a short rest period post-drying, which is why some producers age it before peak flavor. Ask yourself this: do you want saffron to act like color, like perfume, or like taste? Blooming gives you all three. Throwing it in raw usually gives you only yellow water. Surprising detail, saffron can flavor desserts beautifully. Rice pudding, sponge cake, because its aroma reads warm and luxury even without a savory context. Now let's zoom out because one country dominates the supply: the Iran bottleneck and the modern price game. Modern saffron is global, but supply is concentrated. A United Nations/FAO story dated December 3rd, 2025 states, producing 85 to 90% of the world's saffron, Iran remains the global leader. That single fact explains why prices jump, why quality debates get heated, and why branding wars matter. It also explains why value chain talk shows up in serious policy rooms, not just foodie blogs. The same UN/FAO story describes a national workshop held 25th to 29th November, reported in 2025, focused on quality integrity, traceability and marketing. Because if the world relies on one main producer, trust becomes a currency. And the quote that feels almost too modern for a spice this ancient, the FAO representative said, "Ready-to-use and user-friendly saffron products are becoming central to modern consumer demand." Translation: the future of saffron money sits in formats: instant dissolved saffron, pre-dosed packaging, smart dispensing, more than raw threads. So when you see saffron priced like a luxury, you might be paying for more than farming. You might be paying for processing, dose control, and trust packaging that reduces buyer fear. Surprising detail, the same UN/FAO piece openly ties saffron competitiveness to digital branding and influencers. Yes, influencers, because modern demand is steered online. And here comes the final squeeze. Climate pressure hits the supply first. What climate pressure could do to red gold. Saffron is often called climate resilient because it can handle dry conditions, especially compared to thirsty crops. Yet resilience has a limit when groundwater drops, irrigation systems age, or heat spikes hit at the wrong time. The UN/FAO story flags emerging challenges, including climate pressure, water scarcity, as a direct threat to the value chain. And FAO's GIAHS description of Gonabad frames the entire farming system around severe water shortages and the importance of a reliable water source. That matters because saffron's economics depend on consistency. One bad flowering season can erase a year of labour. The other path is industrial optimization, more research into yield, mechanization feasibility, and new processing formats that sell convenience. Here is the uncomfortable question. If climate stress tightens supply, does the market reward careful farming, or does it reward whoever can ship saffron-like products fastest? That is where standards like ISO 3632 stop being boring and start being protected. Surprising detail to leave you with, saffron's future price may depend less on the flower and more on traceability because trust becomes scarce before the spice does. Your next pinch might carry a whole supply chain story. A 14-week siege started with a spice bag. Picture a merchant convoy rolling toward Basel with a cargo that basically screamed to steal me. A Swiss historian later describes the haul as Acht Zentnen Saffron, 8 centimeters of saffron, riding through a dangerous route like it was normal business. So what happened? A nobleman, Henman von Bechberg, hit the convoy and took the saffron. That single hit lit a fuse. Basel and allies moved fast because this was not petty theft, this was a direct attack on trade power. Here is where it gets wild. The response was a full military operation. The same account says Basel sent 100 shooters and even a siege machine. Then after 14 Wochen, 14 weeks, the castle surrendered in August 1374. 14 weeks over spice. Let that sit in your head. Why would anyone risk that? Because saffron in medieval Europe was a high-profit commodity. Lose control of that trade and you lose influence, taxes, and leverage. And the punishment felt medieval in every way. The text claims 16 captured servants were executed on the spot. Then comes the part that sounds like a moral lesson. A chronicler named Justinger basically calls out the justice of it all, writing, "Nu lug Jademan wo Gerechtigkeit ware." Surprising detail, even the good guys split some recovered loot. But the real battle moved from castles to labs, the light test that decides if your saffron is real. Modern saffron trade leans hard on one idea: measurable quality. For decades, buyers have used ISO 3632 standards that score saffron using lab readings tied to key compounds. A scientific paper explains the system clearly. The major markers get expressed as E1% values at 440 nanometers, 257 nanometers, and 330 nanometers. Those numbers sound cold, but the logic is simple. Shine specific wavelengths, measure absorbance, and you get a fingerprint for quality categories. The same paper says saffron is classified into 3 trade categories under ISO 3632. So why does this matter for you, the person paying serious money per gram? Because fraud is not just fake threads, and fraud can be low-grade saffron boosted with color, mixed with plant parts, or stored badly so aroma collapses. The label can still look convincing. Here is the twist. Even the science world argues about the ISO shortcut. That same research calls the ISO approach repeatedly criticized as non-specific and non-accurate. Meaning what? The quick test is useful, but it can miss nuance. Some labs prefer deeper methods like HPLC to separate compounds more precisely, especially when big money shipments are on the line. So when a brand screams premium, the real question becomes, do they test beyond the minimum? Or do they do the cheapest pass that still sells? Surprising detail. A Category 1 label can still hide weak sourcing. Now watch what happens when a place becomes the product. If you want more breakdowns like this, where one tiny flower can be red gold in a glass jar and just spice in your kitchen, hit subscribe. I'll keep bringing quick, simple checks so you can spot real saffron, skip fakes, and understand what you are paying for before you cook it. See you next video!